Before we start the video, please don't be a Baka and subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. I will assure you your little effort will help me a lot. Now back to the video. Curious, Jae-hwan asks if one dies in the Almighty Land, do they come to chaos after that, and she agrees, stating that after dying in chaos, it is really the end, and the people turn into nutrients for the illusion tree. Suddenly, guards walk out of the fortress, holding clothes, and instruct the newly summoned people to form a line, stating that they will be taken to the speech hall. While they are distributing clothes among the people, the woman calls out to one of them, addressing him as James. Turning to her, James asks why she is suddenly at the northern checkpoint, and she replies that she was just passing by and asked to be led in quickly, stating that they are aware of her identity. Addressing her as Mino, the person apologizes and states that they are instructed to check that everyone going into the fortress must have identification. Turning to Jae-hwan, she asks if he has his identification, and he tells her that he does not, realizing it would be difficult to enter without it. She goes to James and states that she forgot to bring her identification with her, offering him the horn of a biorn. She asks him to make do with it, and James loudly states that he has checked her identification and allows her to enter. After that, he turns to Jae-hwan, asking him to show his identification, but Jae-hwan reveals that he does not have any and asks what would happen in such a situation. In response, Mino explains that he is in trouble, and if he requests her help, she can assist him in getting out of this situation. Meanwhile, James clarifies that without proper identification, one cannot enter the fortress. Hearing that, Jae-hwan stands still, leaving Mino worried about his intentions, suspecting that he might be thinking of killing the guards and entering the fortress. However, before she can do it, someone arrives from behind, asking what the matter is, leaving Mino shocked and anxious. Seeing the person, the soldiers quickly form a line and salute him. Mino reveals that he is the most famous person in the fortress and the cleanest checkpoint captain in chaos, Carlton. Meanwhile, Carlton approaches James and asks about the problem, and James explains that Jae-hwan wants to enter the fortress but doesn't have identification. Looking at Jae-hwan, Carlton states that he cannot enter, prompting him to ask why. In response, Carlton says that as the captain, he has the authority to restrict people from entering who lack proper identification and refers to the law of Gorgon to support his claim. After that, the guards bowed down in front of Carlton as a gesture of acknowledgement, while the ones who did not show respect were forced by him to kneel down. Just then, Jae-hwan grabs his sword and tells Carlton to stop holding his sword. Jae-hwan states that he doesn't care about what the law says and asks what is written on the identification. Surprised, Carlton explains that the identification contains the person's name, occupation, skill, partial status, criminal records, and many other such things. Hearing that, Jae-hwan declares that he doesn't need the identification and will not be verifying himself. Considering that his skill of law is not working on Jae-hwan, Carlton states that he will be restraining him and uses his skill of silver light restraint. Suddenly, strong chains start to appear in his surroundings and ensnare Jae-hwan. However, with a single move of his arm, Jae-hwan breaks the chains into pieces. Witnessing this, all the guards, as well as Carlton himself, feel shocked at his strength. Meanwhile, Jae-hwan points to Mino and asks if he can't do what she did, making her feel nervous. Fearing he will reveal her bribery, feeling anxious, she tries to stop him. But Jae-hwan quickly takes out a crystal and throws it at Carlton. Seeing this, James, who accepted the bribe from Mino, starts to shout at Jae-hwan out of fear and suggests to Carlton that he should execute him immediately. Looking at the crystal, the captain asks if his name is Jae-hwan, and he agrees. In response, the captain smiles and states that he was waiting for him, calling him the emissary of the Dear Whisperer. As a step in identity verification, the captain goes on to check Mino's spiritual corruption level, which exceeds 15%, and recommends she medicate as soon as possible. Showing her the test results, Carlton remarks that she knows what she has to do, and she agrees. Meanwhile, Jae-hwan feels confused about what spiritual corruption is, causing Mino to remark that he does not know anything. Mino explains that spiritual corruption is a disease that every inhabitant of chaos gets, and it keeps on increasing just by existing there, which is why the horn of a horned beast is valuable. She adds that James was charmed by it because the horns are the only medicinal ingredient that can ease spiritual corruption in chaos. While she is telling this, Carlton comes near Jae-hwan, stating that he needs to evaluate him and brings the tool to test the spiritual corruption near him. As he brings the tool near Jae-hwan, it starts to beep, indicating that the spiritual corruption of this individual cannot be measured. Shocked at the tool showing an error, the captain, as well as the guards, stare at Jae-hwan. However, soon after, the tool displays the spiritual corruption to be 0%, causing the captain to smile. Taking Jae-hwan's hand, the captain states that he will be returning the crystals to him since the verification is over and puts them in his hands, causing Jae-hwan to ask if he does not need them. In response, Carlton states that these crystals are not something he should easily hand over to someone else, addressing him as the envoy of green purists. Holding the crystals, Jae-hwan states that he is not the envoy of green purists that the captain is referring to, making Carlton smile. Stating that he knows it, Carlton allows them to enter, causing James to ask if it is okay to send them away like that. In response, Carlton states that the crystals Jae-hwan possesses are not ordinary items and, along with increasing individual spiritual power, they have many more functions. With that, Carlton removes the gloves from his hand, revealing that his hand is badly burned, causing James to realize that it happened because of the crystals. Carlton reveals that only a person from the Green Purist clan can wield the Spectre crystals. Carlton states that although Jae-hwan does not look like a member of the Green Purists, he can still wield the Spectre crystals, which has led him to trust his spirit. He reminds James of the time when they checked Jae-hwan's spiritual corruption level, and it showed an error even though the measurement device never makes an error. Confused, James asks what it means, and Carlton reveals that the only reason the device is unable to measure Jae-hwan's spiritual corruption is that his spirit is purer than anyone else in chaos. Therefore, Carlton states that Jae-hwan's identity does not matter because they only need someone who can use the Spectre crystals. He reveals that the people inside the castle will now deliver a judgment on him. Hearing that, James asks if it is related to the Castellan's condition, but the captain states that he does not know the exact details either. After that, he turns his back to James and mentions hearing of someone receiving a bribe to let people enter, asking if it is correct, causing James to become anxious. Meanwhile, Jae-hwan and Mino walk on the streets of the village inside the fortress. While walking, Jae-hwan remarks that the paths are very complicated, while Mino follows him in a state of unconsciousness. Looking at her, Jae-hwan remembers that she was punished by the captain for bribing the guards, which caused her consciousness to become numb for some time. While walking up the bridge, Jae-hwan approaches a person and states that he is looking for a blacksmith specializing in swords, gaining the attention of the person standing under the bridge. Taking out his spirit sword, Jae-hwan asks if there is a blacksmith that can handle a sword of this level, but the person states that he is not sure. While the one standing under the bridge smiles, after some time, Mino regains her consciousness and becomes surprised, asking when they entered the village. Without turning to her, Jae-hwan remarks that she is finally coming to her senses and states that she can go on her own. Surprising her, as he begins to walk away, Mino starts running after him, asking if he is angry because she tried to leave him at the entrance of the fortress and apologizing for that. In response, Jae-hwan states that she guided him to the castle, which is enough, and she will only get in his way from then on. Turning to her, Jae-hwan states that they are very different and repeats that she should go her own way from then on. After standing still for a while, she grits her teeth and starts to run after him again, stating that he does not know his way around the place at all. In response, Jae-hwan states that he can simply ask people for directions, but she insists that he should ask her instead, revealing that she knows this place well. Hearing that, Jae-hwan remarks that he is going to find a nightmare, which confuses her. After a short pause, Mino states that she knows where it might be and asks if he wants her to guide him, and he agrees. Suddenly, he puts his hand in the backpack, stating that there seem to be some people who have business with him, and he turns to the people standing in his way. Looking at them, the person who saw him on the bridge gives a cruel smile, while his fellows ask if they are the people who have a good sword. Looking at them, Mino threatens them to go away if they do not want to get hurt, causing them to remark that she talks too much. Hearing that, one of them gets overwhelmed in anger, while the others state that this brother of theirs gets very angry when he hears such words. After that, they threaten them to hand over the spirit sword if they want to save themselves. In response, Jae-hwan simply states that he does not want to hand it over. Shocked by his calm demeanor, the thugs ask if they are not aware of the type of situation they are in and tell him to simply hand over the sword if he wants to live. Just then, the gigantic person accompanying them runs forward to attack Mino for declining to give him the sword. However, as he is about to attack, Jae-hwan intervenes, cuts both arms of the person, and pushes him with such force that he crashes into the wall, leaving all his fellows shocked as the muscular person lies on the ground. Jae-hwan walks towards them, remarking that they are very annoying, and takes out his sword, stating that if they want to fight, they can come to him. Feeling enraged, the rest of the thugs rush towards him, asking how he dared to harm their youngest brother. Holding their weapons, they state that they will show him the bond between brothers while Jae-hwan points his spirit sword at them, causing them to clash with each other. After some time, Jae-hwan holds his spirit sword with the transparent blood of the enemies dripping down from it, calling his skill amazing. Mino asks how he can finish everything with just a stab, and he reveals that this is the only thing he knows, shocking her. Mino reveals that someone she knows also uses a single technique like him, but his technique is a cut, not a stab. Remembering that he missed one of the earlier attacks during the fight, Mino asks if he slipped up while adjusting his strength. In response, Jae-hwan reveals that when they were fighting against the thugs, there was someone using the stealth technique on the roof, which bothered him, so he decided to scare them a little. Shocked, Mino asks who scares people by blowing up roofs and suggests that he name his technique, an idea that he does not like at all. Afterwards, they start to walk towards the market and soon reach a place called Twilight Dusk. Mino tells Jae-hwan that it is a smith founded by a nightmare and it is also the biggest smith in Gorgon. Just then, someone comes to them and asks if they have come to make a request. The person is Naven, the craftsman of Twilight Dusk, who tells them that it will take a while to fulfill their request if they put it in that day. Hearing that, Mino asks why the observations are full, and he replies that the workshop manager is absent at the moment and there is only the assistant manager in the shop who is also busy. He states that if they are looking for something, it might be better for them to buy a ready-made product rather than ordering something new. Meanwhile, a person standing inside the shop points to the sword placed on a table. He reveals that it is a sword made from the horn of a four-horned beast, which will be completed after one last step. Hearing that, the craftsman sitting in front of him, who appears to be his student, requests that he allow them to do it. In response, the person, who turns out to be Michael Garner, the assistant workshop manager, asks if they can make a hole in such a tough thing. Holding the sword in his hand, Michael states that if anyone succeeds in making a hole in this tough sword, he will be made the assistant manager of Twilight Dusk for one day. Hearing that, all of his students start to try and make a hole but find it very tough and difficult to pierce through. Looking at their weak moves, Michael states that they cannot even create a dent on the sword with the amount of energy they are exercising and shares his disappointment with them. Looking at them from a distance, Nathan remarks that he wonders when he will get a chance to touch a four-horned beast's horn. While he is saying that, he notices that Jae-hwan has already entered the workshop and tries to stop him, but he does not. Hearing his voice, Michael turns around, facing Jae-hwan, while Jae-hwan states that he wants to give it a try, making Michael think that he is a traveling craftsman. Michael states that it will not be easy for him to do since all of his students have been unsuccessful in doing it. While Jae-hwan asks where to make a hole, Michael keeps bragging about his own expertise and skills. Meanwhile, Jae-hwan uses his finger to pierce through the sword, leaving Michael in a state of utter astonishment. Swinging the sword on his finger, Jae-hwan states that since he did it, he will be the assistant manager of the workshop for one day. Just then, cracks start to form on the precious sword, followed by it breaking into pieces, which leaves them all shocked and enraged. Overwhelmed with anger, Michael states that it was a very expensive horn that he destroyed in an instant, but Jae-hwan states that he went easy on it. Jae-hwan states that breaking it completely is easy, but only lightly breaking something is difficult, and he apologizes for what he did. However, deeply angered due to his loss, Michael states that an apology cannot make up for the loss he did. Grabbing Jae-hwan from his clothes, Michael asks what they will tell the Primordial Universe faction that commissioned the weapon to them. Jae-hwan states that he will repay them with a better horn, causing Michael to remark that a beggar like him can never repay them with a horn better than the horn of a four-horned beast. Hearing that, Jae-hwan puts his hand in the backpack and takes out the horn of a five-horned beast, giving it to them, which leaves everyone shocked. Looking at the horn with amazement, Michael states that he can definitely consider it as payment for destroying the four-horned sword, addressing him as dear customer. Considering it to be a relief, Jae-hwan asks if he can use their smith for a little time, to which Michael tells his students to close the doors of the workshop. Complying, the students go and close the door, while Michael starts moving inside, telling Jae-hwan to follow him. Meanwhile, Mina leaves the workshop, stating that there is a place that she needs to visit. After she leaves, the workshop is closed, and Michael takes Jae-hwan inside. He informs him that as the assistant manager of the workshop for that day, Jae-hwan can make use of all the facilities and people there as much as he likes. After that, Michael asks how Jae-hwan managed to obtain the horn of a five-horned beast, and Jae-hwan replies that he got it by himself. Surprised to hear that, Michael asks if he hunted a five-horned beast by himself, and Jae-hwan agrees. In response, Michael becomes amazed, thinking that such strong people are very rare in the entirety of chaos. Jae-hwan turns around, asking him to assist him in making a scabbard. Hearing that, Michael becomes surprised, asking if he is going to use this horn to make a scabbard. In response, Jae-hwan takes out the spirit sword, asking how great this sword might be in his view. Looking at the sword, Michael states that it is a replica of an ice dragon sword and remarks that it is rare since it was made by a nightmare, though it does not look very pretty. However, he thinks that this horn will be too much for a weapon like that, and he should better make a new sword with it instead. However, just then he starts to sense a spiritual energy from the sword and realizes that it is a spirit weapon containing the soul of an elite race. He wonders how it happened. Looking at the sword, Michael remarks that its evolution seems to be a great one, and when this evolution is complete, he will have to give it a new name since it will lose its original name. However, Michael considers making a weapon difficult since Jae-hwan has already destroyed the horn. But Jae-hwan informs him that he has another one as well. Shocked, Michael stares at him while Jae-hwan takes out another horn from the backpack and gives it to him. After gazing at the horn for a while, Michael realizes that it was from a five-horned beast, so it must have 5 horns, which is quite an obvious thing. Turning to Jae-hwan, he asks how he can assist him, and Jae-hwan wants him to show how he refines things. Agreeing, Michael asks if there is a particular shape that he wants, but Jae-hwan states that he will leave that to him. Hearing that, Michael becomes excited, stating that he will show him his own skills as the master craftsman in the Gorgon Castle. The commander sits in his office, enjoying tea. Meanwhile, his secret agent informs him about an event involving thugs being killed by someone named Jae-hwan and mentions that they lost their target during the operation. In response, the castle commander, Yurin Cheever, asks for details on how the thugs were killed, but the agent admits that he's uncertain about that as well. He explains that he suddenly lost consciousness while on the roof, leaving the commander to inquire if he was captured. Considering that the murderer perceived through the stealth skills of a master-level 3rd stage adapter, the commander deduces that the perpetrator must be at least a 5th stage adapter. Consequently, he orders his agent to increase the force and thoroughly search every corner of the castle to locate this individual, and the agent complies. After the agent leaves the room, the commander winces and lets out a sigh. In a sudden realization, he opens his eyes and notices his teacup shaking violently. He pounds the table, remembering his castellan, and tells him to endure a little longer. Meanwhile, in a bar, a lot of people sit watching a show in which the host plays the video of the most debated topic of that time, the 99th floor solo clear. As they watch, the individuals discussed potential scenarios regarding what might have transpired with the person involved. Just then, one of them reveals that the tower got suspended and shares his belief that some demon might have gotten caught, causing the suspension. The group talks about the rumor that the demon ran away and abandoned their cultivation duty, expressing their astonishment at someone's ability to clear a first-generation tower alone. As they discuss amongst themselves, the door swings open and Mino enters. The sight of such a beautiful woman surprises everyone present, but she pays them no mind and heads straight to the counter, taking a seat. At that moment, a person approaches her with the intention of inquiring about something. However, she swiftly turns around and rudely tells him to leave. This causes the individual to feel embarrassed, prompting him to silently retreat. Sitting there, she feels increasingly frustrated, which leads her to order a considerable quantity of drakes. After consuming numerous drinks, she loses control of her senses and begins to vent her frustration about Jae-hwan in front of Claire, the pub owner, who herself starts to feel exasperated. Taking into account Mino's irritation with Jae-hwan, Claire asks why she doesn't simply distance herself from him. Mino responds, explaining that he has been a source of great frustration due to his tendency to destroy everything during his fights. She goes on to mention that his fighting style demonstrates a disregard for the established rules of their surroundings, coupled with his penchant for uttering peculiar statements. Mino recalls an instance during one of his fights when she remarked on his lack of hesitation in employing his strength, despite not comprehending the nature of chaos. Jaewon's response was a simple assertion that those who hesitate are not truly human. These comments, along with his declaration that he and Mino are fundamentally different, intensify her frustration and make her feel insignificant. She conveys that while everyone in chaos has endured hardships, Jaewon inexplicably emerges and looks down upon her, asserting that she can never grasp his motivations. As she continues to vent her frustration, Claire places a comforting hand on her shoulder, remarking on her immaturity and advising her to never get mixed up in all that ever again. Claire firmly forbids Mino from approaching Jaewon again, emphasizing that doing so would result in her own death. Upon hearing this, Mino becomes perplexed and questions why Claire is speaking in such a manner and what her intentions are. Just as she ponders this, the pub's doors swing open, ushering in a radiant stream of shimmering particles that envelop Mino. All of a sudden, a parrot materializes before her and delivers a piece of paper to her. The paper happens to be a letter from Carlton, the chief of the northern checkpoint. Puzzled by the unexpected correspondence, Mino begins to open the letter, her anticipation clouded by a sense of unease. In the midst of this, a voice emanates from behind her, inquiring if she is the infamous Witch of Massacre. Startled by the question, Mino instinctively reaches for her dagger, acknowledging that some do indeed refer to her by that name. She turns around only to have her arm seized tightly by the newcomer. The forceful grip causes her to drop her dagger. Expressing his lack of interest in engaging in a fight with her due to his busy schedule, the individual discloses that he requires her assistance for a task. Meanwhile, within the confines of a workshop, a massive five-horned beast materializes, leaving Michael in a state of shock and fear. Overwhelmed by fear, Michael contemplates how he could possibly refine such a monstrous entity. Suddenly, Jaewon emerges from behind, forcefully pulling Michael back and reminding him of their ongoing smelting process. Despite the chaotic presence of the rampaging monster nearby, Jaewon dismisses it and asserts that Michael had previously agreed to aid him, urging him to fulfill his commitment. Appropriately, having launched countless hammer strikes upon the horn, Michael finds himself exhausted and comments that the refinement task is far beyond his current capabilities. Jaewon counters this notion, asserting that the issue lies not in levels but in perception. He proceeds to place his hand over Michael's eyes briefly and then withdraws it, emphasizing the importance of seeing. Perplexed by the experience, Michael gazes at the horn, which begins to melt right before his eyes, eventually floating in the air. This causes him to cover his eyes in shock. In an unexpected turn, the melted horn undergoes a transformation, manifesting into a colossal five-horned beast, which leaves Michael utterly astounded as the beast unleashes havoc. Michael remains in a state of disbelief, pondering if this creature truly embodies the essence of the five-horned beast. He reflects on his previous casual approach to refining, realizing the gravity of his actions toward such a formidable being. Struggling to comprehend the situation, Michael questions if he is trapped in a dream and seeks to awaken by approaching the nearby door. Running towards it, he asserts the dreamlike nature of his surroundings while Jaewon observes with a sigh. Upon rushing outside, Michael desperately calls for assistance, only to be met with a shocking sight: his students and workshop laborers have transformed into airy skeletons. Overwhelmed by fear and disbelief, Michael trembles as his students inquire if he has already completed the refinement process. This prompts him to enter a trance-like state, leaving his students puzzled. Amidst this turmoil, a voice informs Michael that he lacks the privilege to behold this realm. These occurrences lead him to question the existence of such a surreal world. Meanwhile, Jaewon is engrossed in hunting the monster and forging weapons from its horns, contemplating his presence in this unfamiliar domain. Despite the challenges, he remains unfazed, continuing his work by extracting body parts from the living monster and diligently striking it with his forging hammer. While doing that, he wonders why he was specifically chosen to be sent to this world. Outside the room, Michael gradually emerges from his trance, letting out a piercing scream. After some time, looking at Jae-hwan, who has broken the horn, Michael remarks that a normal human's attempt to acquire power equal to a nightmare or surpass natural limits is ultimately futile. Commenting that he appears to have aged too much to handle the horn effectively, Michael suggests that Jae-hwan should have recognized this fact. Dropping his gaze, Michael explains that Jae-hwan originally visited the workshop to see the manager, who was a nightmare. However, it has been quite some time since the manager left, leaving behind a mere human like Michael. In response, Jae-hwan dismisses the importance of his race, asserting that as long as Michael can craft a scabbard, it's all good. At encouraging Michael to persist, despite Jae-hwan's encouragement, Michael asserts that he has already made numerous attempts. However, Jae-hwan argues that success can be achieved even after trying 100 million times, eliciting a chuckle from Michael. Michael states that although he does not seem like working hard to him, in reality, he has worked really hard. This triggers a memory for Jae-hwan of his friend Jae, who used to claim he was working diligently while watching Jae-hwan. Recalling Jae's assertion of mastering all the skills related to blacksmithing, Jae-hwan remembers Jae's confidence in being able to repair any weapon from the tower with a 99% success rate. However, he stated that after achieving that success rate, he came to have the odd thought that he was not running towards the 99% chance of success but away from the 1% chance of failure. Drawing on this memory, Jae-hwan turns to Michael and acknowledges the tremendous effort Michael has put in, asking if he understands the principle behind the processing skill. Michael responds that the principle of the nightmare's processing skill is one of the original skills that have existed since the beginning. He analogizes it by asking how a human can explain the origin of the world. Upon hearing Michael's words, Jae-hwan notes that Michael has been utilizing a skill without truly comprehending its essence. After a brief silence, Michael posits that the principle might involve infusing tools with spiritual power and meticulously refining the horn using that power. However, he questions why other craftsmen cannot grasp this straightforward principle. Jae-hwan explains that these craftsmen haven't properly learned how to utilize the skill. Hearing that, Michael thinks that if the principle behind this skill is so simple, his students must be able to at least copy it or do something similar. Turning to Jae-hwan, Michael asks if he knows the principle behind processing. In response, Jae-hwan states that he did not know about it but figured it out, and he brings his finger near the horn. By the impact of his touch, the horn starts to melt itself, making them astonished. He instructs them to look closely and tell him what they see, causing all the craftsmen to get near him, watching closely. They reveal that they can see particles breaking down and remark that it must be very difficult. In response, Jae-hwan asserts that their extraordinary efforts have inadvertently solidified the constraints of the world, limiting their perspectives. He emphasizes that they should recognize that if their intensive labor hasn't led to success, it's not their fault but rather an indication of the limitations of the world itself. Michael is shocked by this revelation and recalls how the nightmare he worked with always discouraged him from learning such methods. The nightmare always used to assert that these skills belonged exclusively to nightmares and not to humans. The nightmare's discouragement revolved around human limitations, labeling Michael's potential as no more than an apprentice level. Michael, however, resisted these constraints and believed he could transcend them through hard work. Remembering that, Michael asks what he is supposed to do, inquiring if Jae-hwan wants him to fight against the world. In response, Jae-hwan states that the world tricks individuals into believing they can achieve what they truly can and states that Michael might be old but still possesses the capacity to fight. After that, he turns to the horn again, telling them to take another close look while advising them not to rely on the system and instead use their own eyes. Complying, Michael looks closely and finds Jae-hwan running towards the same beast again. This makes him realize that Jae-hwan has always looked at a world without skills or interfaces, an honest world where there is no deception. This makes him wonder how someone can live like that unless they are insane, and he raises his hammer in the air, launching a forceful strike at the horn. Sometime later, Jae-hwan emerges from the workshop, stating that his work is complete and he must depart. Michael gazes at his transformed sword and inquires whether Jae-hwan has chosen a name for it. In response, Jae-hwan reveals that he is not, prompting Michael to request the privilege. Jae-hwan grants it, and Michael names the sword Maverick, stating that there can be no better name for this sword. After that, all the craftsmen bid farewell to Jae-hwan and wish him a safe journey, feeling sad at his departure. As he begins to walk away, Michael calls out to him once more and asks how he looks in the world Jae-hwan sees. In response, Jae-hwan simply utters the word human before departing without a backward glance, leaving Michael to ponder if anyone else can truly comprehend that solitary world. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Thanks for watching, the Baka Senpai.